Well, hi there, all of you pottery and non-pottery people. It's Sunday. Sunday is a good day to chillax and do a little bit of fun in the pottery studio. I am live here on Twitch as well as, there we go. Hi. Hi, everybody. Okay, so I'm really like, wait, look, what? Ooh, isn't there like a horror movie that's like that? I don't want to get trapped in all that horror movie stuff right now. But okay, so, I thought about what I was going to talk about a little bit today before I get into just playing around in my mud, because I'm a dirty potter, like my friend Dante, who is also on this YouTube channel as Earth Nation Ceramics. So, yeah, he calls them all dirty potters. So maybe you're a dirty potter too. Who knows? Anyhow, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the tools and things that, as a potter, I use, particularly what we call in the business ribs. Now, ribs are sort of a nifty thing because they allow you to expand your shapes and they allow you to expand your repertoire as a potter. So look over here. Ooh, look at that. I got another camera. Hi. So what ribs do for us is they help us to make specific shapes and they make it repeatable as well. So I am one of those people that I like to have a lot of pottery tools around. You do not have to have as many tools as I do by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just a freak that way. That's just all there is to it. But I do right now, I'm in this kind of a stretch where I'm doing a lot of bowls. All right, sorry, I live like kind of by Burbank Airport, so you're going to be hearing a lot of planes go by. Goodness. I'm going to flip this one so that people can see if you're watching on Twitch, and then I'm going to just go through by hand and sort of show you what I got here. So one of the things that's in the repertoire here, just going to tilt that down so you can see, things like this. These are all, this group here, are all considered to be pottery knives. I've got quite the collection of these. Some of them are things that people were closing down their studios and said, here, have an extra. Or I was at school one day and it was the end of the term and the teacher said, here, take some of these. I know you always use them. And so I wound up with more pottery knives than I think I'm ever going to need. But I want to talk about these three in particular right now. These are actually all handmade by a guy who's on Etsy. It's Burl Chaser Studios, and he just takes these really, really gorgeous pieces of wood and just makes them into different pottery knives and various and sundry other kinds of ribs and shapers and all of that. He's also a professional potter. So that's kind of nifty when you have somebody who actually knows the use of the tool and they're making them by hand. I really, really like supporting people who do handwork. So just so you can see this a little closer, you'll see on one side here, we've got the edge. And then this other side, we've got this scoop right here, which is really kind of nifty. You can sort of see it a little bit better like that. And it's really neat because as you're working with something, you can flip it over and you can carve out a little space. You can use it as a potter's thumb to start shaping something from the inside, from the inside of a bowl or something of that nature. And it's really handy to have these little two-sided tools. So also the edge here will help us to take extra clay off while our piece is still on the wheel. And I'm one of those people that the more that I can do while it's on the wheel, the happier I am, because there's less trimming to do later. Sometimes that doesn't work out that way. Sometimes you actually need to have the bulk on the bottom for everything to be supported properly, so your bowl or cup or whatever doesn't collapse. Sometimes you really want to push those shapes a lot, and you need to have the support until the clay dries up a little bit more. So sometimes we use these and sometimes we don't. So anyway, moving on to the next round of stuff here. These here are another kind of rib entirely. And you'll notice, by the way, most of these have holes so that you can actually put your thumb on top and balance on the other side with your other finger, so you have a really nice grip here. I'm trying to do both of these here all in one go, but so that's really nice, because when you're working with water, that's something that's really important. So this is known as a bowl rib. And also, honestly, you can use it on platters and things like that, because you've got this nice edge there where you can shape your platter so it's not completely flat on the bottom. You can also use it on this side to shape a bowl on this end here. And this will also help you to shape your bowl, or you can sort of use it in this manner at this angle, so that the bottom here is on your bowl, and as it is scraping along the floor of your bowl or whatever, this side is being used right now to shape the actual wall of the bowl. So these are kind of nifty to have. I've got several different shapes of those. So I've got these two are very, very similar in shape here. But as you can see, this is another one of those handmade ones by Burl Chaser. And like I said, Burl Chaser, he's on Etsy. He just does beautiful, beautiful work. I actually treated myself one Christmas to some of his tools that he was selling 10 of them for $100, which is really great for handmade tools. And these are really hefty, and they're really beautiful to work with. Here's another one that's a bit larger. You can sort of see this in comparison, that the shape is a little bit different to use. So, you know, you have all of these variations that you can do in your shapes because you have different shaped tools. It's really sort of nifty. These also are some really, really great bowl ribs. You can be a little bit more aggressive with your shaping if you have larger pieces, because you can see here, I'm hoping you can see here, by the size of my hand, which is not that big. I don't have huge hands. I have little tiny delicate fingers. But you can see you can make a larger swoop with that end, this end right here. So I've got several of these that I've gotten. This is part of the package that I got from him. These are almost identical, except for this one here has this nice round edge to the back, so you can play a little bit with that as well. And these two are very similar in shape, but again, these are great for bowls. These here, this one here, and this one here, if you can see, again, we've got that nifty little hole in the back end. And this one here, these are more for platters, so you can use these to make that bottom really nice and flat, and also to curve up maybe the lip of your plate if you wish to do that. Make a little bit of, just have a little bit of fun. Play with different shapes and all of that. So you can kind of see how well these things are made. They're really quite nice. Very, very nifty. Very handy to have in the studio. And this one too, this is great because I use this one. This is one of my favorite tools, actually. I use this for bowls. But what's really great about this tool is right here on the end, Burl Chaser has cut out a couple of little pieces. And what that does is it allows you to make the foot of your piece a little bit more interesting. And that's something that maybe I'll show you guys later what the results are. But you can take this piece here and put it down right up to the edge of your bowl or your cup or whatever you're working on. And it'll make this nice little indentation here, and it just makes it look more professional, in my opinion. So yeah, so those are some of those cool tools. This is another one that is one of my favorites, and as you can see here, I've kind of really sort of mangled it, unfortunately, with use. But these are pieces here that you can use to make more more marks on your clay, give it a little bit more visual interest. And again, you can just really hang on to these in your water and all that. And you've got two different, patterns and designs here that you can put on perhaps like the bottom of a pitcher or the bottom of a bowl, or even you can use it for the lip of your bowl to give it a little bit more interest, to give your glaze a little something to pool in. I'm going to have to get myself another one of these pretty soon. Unfortunately, I don't have space for a full studio, and I don't do woodworking, so I can't do this on my own. Getting on to doing some more of those bowl shaping or cup shapers. This is kind of nifty. I'm going to set these guys aside real quick so we have some space. But these tools over here are really, really handy for that. I'm going to see if I can actually see down here. Yeah, these over here. These are really nifty because you can work with this. This will shape the inside of a cup really, really nicely. And again, Burl Chaser. I know I should be getting paid by this guy for all this, but I'm not. Anyway, so Burl Chaser is really smart in the way that he's created this really nifty shape, because you can fit this down inside a cup if you're working on a cup, something a little bit smaller, or maybe a vase, and then just really nicely, just slowly be able to move this with your hand to be able to push that clay out and create a really nifty shape with that. What's great too is with these other tools that are sitting here, sometimes a wood tool is not what you need. Sometimes what you're going to need is something that's got maybe a little bit more flexibility. These are all made by, there's actually two companies represented here. There's Kemper Tools, and Kemper Tools has been around for the last gazillion years as far as I know. And this is actually what they call a rubber rib. All right, and one side is very nicely curved here, and the other side is flat. And it goes like this. If you can see that, it'll just flex for you really nicely. This one is a little bit stiffer and a little bit harder because sometimes you need that when you're working with something like a stoneware clay, and you need a little bit more pushback. You do need a little flexibility, but you don't need it to be completely stiff like a wooden tool would be. But then again, sometimes this is what Mud Tools makes this. Cheryl Mud Tools is the name of the maker, and these are a lot more flexible. And sometimes that's what you need. You need to be able to curve something around the outside or curve something around the inside, and you still have this really neat kind of kidney shape to it. And again, these holes in the middle, man, I can't even stress enough how handy they are to have. Again, this is an even less flexible tool that Kemper made, and you have those in other little sizes like this too, smaller pieces. This is another one that I love to use for making bowls and other things, because you can really just push it and flex it, and it just, you can really hold it in your hand really nicely. It just fits fabulous. I'm telling you, darling, it's just fabulous. So there are these here. All of these are similar shapes, but these are all different flexibility. This one is one of the Mud Tools that's a little bit less flexible as well. I just like to try different brands and see kind of what I like and what works for my style of throwing and pottery and all of that. This is sort of interesting here. This is relatively stiff. This is another type of rib, obviously, from the wooden ones, but I've got wood ribs that are very similar in shape to this as well. This one I like because it's got that nice sharp edge right there. So I can come right up to the side of my pot and it'll be flat down on the wheel head, and I can just move clay upwards with my hand on the other side of the clay wall, and it just really works out nicely. This is another one of those tools that I've ended up with, well, a bunch of them. And then this one's a little bit different because this has got a nice little curved edge here, and sometimes that's what I want. So those are those kinds of, those particular kinds of ribs. They're pretty handy. This is another type of bowl rib here. Let me do this. So you can see this. Again, this is another from that nifty guy, Burl Chaser. And this is something when you're doing bowls that you want to have a real major curve to them, and they're larger. And you can really just, when you're bringing that clay up, it really helps to do that. And again, I mean, you can see that nice round edge there, that nice shape. And you've got a nice piece where you can just hold on to it with your hand. And you can also use the, you know, the flip side of this. You know, so it's just so nifty to have all these tools. It really is. These are a couple of other tools that I use. Now, this tool here is what they call, shockingly, a metal rib. This metal rib, actually, I'm going to have to replace it soon because now it's been around long enough that I've got like a little chunk here that's probably going to tear part of my skin off. But the edge of it has been trimmed away so that when I go in, I can, again, bring it right up to the side of my pot on the wheel head, and I can go from there and shape, and also I can scrape some of the slip off of the piece as it's in process. So that's that. That's really neat. And this is the same thing without that piece cut away from it. Some of you who have been doing pottery for a while, you'll recognize these. You can get these in any old pottery store or go online and get it at a big ceramic store or whatever. These are just really, they're not very expensive. They're really, really easy to find. Moving on, here's another couple of tools that are great for round insides, you know. Again, for your bowls, for your vases, for your cups, or, you know, maybe you want to make a tankard that's got something that's a little bit more like that. You know, again, I just like the way these things fit in my hand. This is for like when you're doing really heavy duty work. I haven't even used this yet because I haven't done anything that's required something that's as thick. I mean, you can look at that wall. Wowza. Super thick. You know, give him that little, that little, oh, wait. Oops. A squirrel. All right. So I don't even know. Oh, that's so funny. And there went my dog. Sam, is there a squirrel? Is there a squirrel? Go get that squirrel. He's getting that squirrel. We'll talk about this. I don't even know what this is for. I don't even know. Do we know what this is for? No. But all I know is I want to learn how to use this damn thing. Look at that thing. Holy cow. I mean, it's big. Look how little my hand is with that. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Really, really big. Someday I'm going to use this thing. God, challenge accepted, right? Okay, so here are things that are really, really handy for when you're actually throwing things that have a little bit more of a narrow neck. So let's say you've thrown a bottle and you've closed your neck down a whole bunch. These tools are things that are going to help you to get inside and push that clay out and shape it again. So yes, I know this looks really rude, you perverts, dirty, dirty potters. But the fact of the matter is this will drop right inside of your clay, and then you can just slide it down on the inside and slowly, slowly push your clay outwards without having to stick your fingers and your hand and your whole hand and your arm in there to try and manipulate the clay from the inside out to make that shape. So you can just drop this through a nice thin bottle neck and have some control over how you're shaping it. This is another tool that is exactly that for maybe slightly shorter pieces. So you can kind of get an idea of the shapes that you can make with this from the inside out. And also this is double-sided, so you can manipulate this as well. This is what you beat your kids with when they're naughty. No, I'm totally kidding. Please don't call support services. But this is another thing where you can drop this inside a bottle or a jar or anything like that, and you can shape it a little bit more. So there's those. Do I have anything else that I haven't covered? I don't really think I have. Well, I pretty much got everything. Ooh, except for these tools. These tools are kind of fun too. These are another pair of nifty things where you can push things out. Did you get that squirrel, buddy? This is another one where you can push things out. Oh, there's the dog. Off he goes. He's so funny. This is another where you can push things out, or you can put a little bit of a detail on your bowl or cup or whatever. This one too, it's another thinner shape that you can just play with. So those are sort of the tools of the day. I want to also talk about something else. And now I'm going to be moving my little stuff around here. Something that I think is really very important for everybody who creates. And I'm going to talk a little bit louder now because the wind here is really bad and my wind chime is just going nuts. There's this interesting phrase that has been used in the culinary world for a while. And it's called, and please, if you speak French, forgive me for just completely mangling the language. But it's called mise en place, or mise en place, for those of us who are so American we can't pronounce a dang thing properly. And what that means is everything in its place. And that's important when you're setting things up and you're about to sit down to doing whatever it happens to be, your pottery, your woodworking, if you're fixing an engine, if you're doing anything that has to do with doing a project, right? You have to think about what it is that you're going to need, and you're going to have to think about where it needs to be placed so that things are most efficient. I guess that's the best way to put it. So what I do personally when I'm setting up, I make sure I sit down and I think about what kind of tools I'm going to be needing. So this is my pottery wheel behind me. You can't see it right now. You'll see it here in a little bit. But one of the things that I need is this needle tool. All right, this is going to help me to cut off wonky rims of pots or pitchers or bowls or whatever and even them out. But it's also going to help me to see how thick the bottom of my pot or bowl is, so I know that I don't wind up pushing through to the actual head of the wheel. Don't want to do that. So that's going to be kept handy. I've got my bucket here, right here with some water in it. I've got several different kinds of sponges in here. So this is another Mud Tools sponge. This is what they call a finishing sponge. It's very, very fine. I don't know if you can see it. Let's do this. It's a very fine sponge. You can see sort of the grain on it is not really, really rough. This is another kind of sponge. I think this is also from Mud Tools, I believe. Don't quote me. But this is a little bit rougher. And I use this actually often to take glaze off of the bottoms of pots after they've been glazed and before they've been fired. So that's really handy to do that. And then I've got this. This is one of my favorite sponges to work with. This is a natural sponge that I use to throw with. I'll use this in my right hand as I'm pulling up a wall or whatever. And you can get all of this stuff is really easy. You can get it, like I said, at Big Ceramic Store online, which is bigceramicstore.com. You can go down to whatever your local pottery supply store is, and you can get a hold of these pretty easily, right? So that's going to be, since I'm right-handed, that's going to be on my wheel on my right side. I've also got this ordinary sponge that you can just get over at, Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever. You can pick these up. Well, I don't know if anybody still has an Osh nearby or there are any left, but this is where I got mine, is I got it at Osh. Usually you can find these in either the cleaning supply aisle, or you can find something like this in the paint aisle, of all things. And I've got these handy because I always have to make sure that as things go on, that I keep my space clean. And since I am a professional potter and I'm using this kind of, the clay all the time, I need to really make sure that I keep the clay dust down, because clay dust is one of the potter's worst enemies. Clay ordinarily is fine when it's wet. It's not harmful at all, but once you get the clay dust and it starts floating around in the air, you've got something that's called silica in it. And if you inhale it over a long period of time enough, you wind up getting this disease called silicosis. And essentially, you're going to suffocate to death over a very long, miserable period of time. So I am really, really careful about cleaning up after myself, cleaning up all my tools once I'm done, washing everything down. I wipe down my wheel, I mop around the floor, and I make sure I keep that clay dust down. Also, I adore my dog. And since he's down around the floor and his nose is a lot closer to the floor, and he sniffs the ground a whole lot, I want to make sure that he doesn't get it either. I want him to be as healthy as he can for as long as he can, because I love my dog. So sponge, really important to have, and it's also handy to keep the splashing down. Another thing that I have is just this ordinary tool. After I told you how nice and clean my tools are, this one's got a spot on it. Don't tell anybody, okay? This tool is really, really handy. This is another one that you can get at your paint supply place. It only costs like a couple bucks, if even that. And I use this to just scrape whatever leftovers of clay there are on top of my my wheel head. Just makes it real quick. Get that done. Sometimes I will do jars and things that are a little bit taller, and after I've closed the piece off so that my hand won't fit inside of it, what I need to do is I need to get the water out of the inside of that so it doesn't create a crack later on. This handy dandy thing, look at that. Is that not impressive? Wait, we'll do that again in slow motion. Okay. So this is a sponge, basically like on a car antenna. That's basically what it is. This is from Gem Studio Tools, and that's XIEM. They make some really, really great tools, I have to say. I'm kind of addicted to their stuff. You can make something like this cheaply, probably with a car antenna or something similar, and a regular old sponge and a rubber band, quite honestly, and it'd be super duper cheap. And it would expand. Or if you don't really care about expanding, then what you could do is just take like a chopstick or, just about anything like a pencil or something, and just get a nice piece of flexible sponge and just take a rubber band, and as they say in Britain, Bob's your uncle. I just happen to like this because I'm a tool freak. So I'm not planning on using this today, but I did want to show you, just in the event that I decided I was going to do something like this, I want to make sure I have it handy. This here thing is to cut my clay. It's a wire tool. It's a wire cutter, Also, if you're a professional assassin, they would probably call this a garrote. So for professional assassins, you should probably start getting your tool at the pottery supply store. All right. You're probably not a professional assassin and watching this, but if you are, I just want you to know I'm not going to make you mad, ever, ever. All right, so I'm going to start getting ready to do some stuff, but before I do, I wanted to show you this. This is another thing that Burl Chaser sells in his Etsy store. And what this is it's a combination of beeswax and some other oils. And every so often, what you really should do is take care of your tools. Just take care of your tools because it's, you know what, it's expensive to buy them. So what I do is I'll wash off all of my wood tools when I know I'm not going to be throwing for a couple of days. I let them dry out completely. And then I will just get my paws in here, dab a little bit on my hands, and then just start rubbing them into my tools to keep them from splitting. As you probably noticed on, oh my goodness, on this tool, this thing got wet. And it started, unbeknownst to me, my box had leaked, and this was sitting in like a pool of water. And then when it dried out, it cracked, and it really, I don't know if you can see that well, but that just really kind of broke my heart. I could probably fill this in with something, but I don't know. Maybe I'll just get another one eventually. I don't use this a whole lot, so I'm not really emotionally attached to it. It's just kind of handy to have. But anyway, point being, get yourself some of this stuff so that you can take really, really good care of your tools. It's just too expensive to keep replacing them all the time, especially when you like really good pottery tools. One other thing before I start actually making stuff that I wanted to show you was this little spreadsheet. Now, when you are working in a more public studio, so maybe it's your school, or maybe it's Parks and Recreation or something of that nature, or like me, I have an actual ceramic studio that I work in. Sometimes it gets hard to remember how many pieces you've made, what they've looked like, and all of that. And you want to keep track of that. You want to keep track of the glaze you used. You want to keep track of your results. And for me, part of that is that I have to keep a track of how much I spent on the firing at the particular place that I go to. They charge not only for the class of, what was it, 8 or 9 weeks, they also charge you per piece for firing. So I want to know, since I sell my ceramics, I want to know how much my firing cost is, because the firing cost will also include the glazes. So what I have made here is what they call a pottery flow chart. And this is something that you can just make in Excel. And I think like the Microsoft people have something similar that you can do, or excuse me, Google has like Google Sheets or something, and it's the same thing. It's a spreadsheet program, so you can take any old spreadsheet program and make this. I know this is backwards, but what I've done here is I've got the date that I made the piece, the description of the piece, whether it's a bowl or a vase or it's big or little or whatever it happens to be, the date that it went into the bisque firing, okay, the date that it was glaze fired over here, and the glaze description here, and then what the results were. So this is really handy to keep your results together, because, hey, maybe this glaze combination that you did, maybe it just turned out really, really beautifully and you want to reproduce it. Or you found out that it's the ugliest thing on the planet and you never want to see it again and you don't want to make that mistake. So you keep track of your results here. Maybe you like the shape of your piece, whatever it happens to be. And it also kind of gives you an indication of how long it takes from the start to the finish of how many days or weeks or whatever it took to get to your final firing. And this is really, really a very, very simple sheet to make. As I said, I know this is all backwards on camera, but it'll still give you the idea of how to do it. It's super, super simple, and it helps you to just stay organized and not lose your stuff. And then you just, 3-hole punch that bad boy. You can get, an ordinary folder at any office supply or school supply place. You can get them at Target, whatever. And then you can just keep a track of what you're doing. So that's something that's really, really handy. I think I'm about done with introducing tools and things like that. So, right here is the next bag of clay that we'll be working with. So here we go. Here is like more stuff that is, how is pottery done? Oh, wait, before I do this, speaking of mise en place, I'm going to get my exceptionally sexy work apron on. This I got off of Etsy as well, by the way. I'm going to set this aside real quick. This is a potter's apron. Obviously, I have not rinsed this for a little bit. I really should. I'm a bad girl. But anyway, this exceptionally sexy potter's apron I got from Clay Dog Studios, also on Etsy. And it's not just a regular apron that you put on top. It's got this nifty panel in the middle so that when you sit down, you're all protected from goop. So I'm going to put this on to protect my clothing, especially when you work with red clay. It's got iron oxide in it, which the iron makes it red. And it really has a nasty habit of staining clothes, and it just takes forever to get it out, if you can ever get it out at all. I'm also going to roll my sleeves up. Gosh, I feel it's like Mr. Rogers getting his little sweater on, isn't it? Yeah, I'm just going to get my sleeves out of the way because it's going to get messy. Hi, doggo. Now, I made eye contact with the doggo, and he's going to bring his ball by. Eventually, I'll let you see him. Oh, yeah, there he is. He's got the ball in his mouth. Look out, folks. Let's see. I'm going to take that tool. I'm going to take that tool. Leave that one out. All right, I'll get some of my other tools handy dandy ready to go. Let's see what I got here. All right. So we're going to get back to this, but first we're going to have a drink. And we're going to have our glasses handy because we're blind. All right, so you start out with the clay. I'm going to start out with some warm-ups because I haven't thrown for a little while. So I'm going to do like a couple of small things today. This is and this will be an interesting experience because I haven't thrown with this clay before. My favorite clay is up in Northern California, and it's kind of ruinously expensive to have it shipped down here because, well, one box of clay is 2 of these, and that equals 50 pounds. So shipping 50 pounds of clay at a time makes it so expensive that nobody would be able to buy my work because I'd have to put that into the calculations. But, this handy dandy tool just cuts right through it. What I try to do is I try to do what we call wedging my clay. I try to wedge my clay sort of all in one go, or I'll take like 3 or 4 of these and I'll make them into the little balls of clay that I use all at once so I don't have to stop in between and clonk. I don't have to stop in between and do it. So wedging clay is kind of like making bread dough. So I'm going to tilt this down so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. So what we're trying to do when you wedge the clay is you're trying to get all of the platelets in there. So the platelets, on kind of like a micro level, look kind of like, picture kind of like rice. And that's all the little teeny weeny little things and molecules that make up a chunk of clay like this. And what we want to do is we want to get them all rolling in the right direction, which is why we wedge. And the other reason we wedge is because we want to get the air bubbles out of the clay, because if the air bubbles are still in the clay when we put it on the wheel, you're going to wind up getting lumps and bumps and a thin spot and just nastiness. And it's really, really hard to get past that. So you wedge it a bunch of times. I sort of do like a half-assed, what do they call them? Oh God, now I can't think of it. But you can kind of see what it winds up looking like. It's like a shell pattern. The other thing you can do, I do another half-assed pattern, which they call the ram's horn. There are people who do this way better than I do, but for whatever reason, it still works for me. You can kind of get an idea, the ram's head, ta-da, da-da-da. So that's what we do. We get all those handy-dandy air bubbles out of there. And then we make this into a nice little sort of ball shape. I think I'm going to make some smallish bowls. I don't know. I'll find out. Now, it's interesting. Some people measure out their clay, and they say, well, you want to measure out a pound of clay or a pound and a half or 2 pounds or 5 pounds or whatever the heck it is that they need for their particular project. Generally speaking, I agree with that, because if you're doing production pottery and you want to do a bunch of pieces that are exactly the same size, you should have exactly the same weight of clay to work with, right? I don't have a scale anymore. I used to have one in my studio when I was still living up in Northern California, but that studio and house and life went away. So part of that studio that went away happens to be the scale that I had. I'll get another one eventually. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. That's the first thing, is I don't have a scale. Secondly, I don't do production pottery. I would say I'm probably about an intermediate level potter. I am not an expert potter by any stretch of the imagination. I guess you could call me a talented amateur. I don't do production pottery work. I just do what I feel like doing, especially now. I just do what I enjoy doing. And maybe eventually I'll get back into doing work of that nature. You never know. It could happen. But right now I'm not, so I don't measure out my clay. You can if you like. I won't tell anybody. And people are funny too. People always talk about how, I can get this piece at Target. Well, okay, maybe you can. Yeah, you probably can't. That's what happens when, you get all your stuff from foreign countries cheaply. It makes it harder for people who actually make things by hand, because people aren't educated about, people are not educated about what handmade is and what it takes to make handmade. And I think it's kind of unfortunate, actually. Here's my usual pottery rant. I think it's unfortunate because people are losing the ability to have a craft. And I think that's unfortunate, because having a craft, being able to work with your hands, I think that's really important for our mental health. Being able to create something, even if it's, I know people are like, oh, I'm not creative, but they make the most amazing food on the planet. And they're like, oh, I'm not creative. It's like, well, wait a minute. You actually are able to get all your food out and tasting good and perfect and amazing and you get it all out at one time, and you're telling me you don't have a talent? Really? Because I don't know how to do that. Anyway, getting back to the topic at hand, this is one of those situations where you need to educate people about the value of the craft and the value of handmade. End rant. All right. This probably is going to have a couple air bubbles in it, but we'll find out. Right? Right. What the heck? Let's get more. More ribs, better. More better. All right, so now I'm going to move you guys a little bit closer so you can actually see my wheel here. It's hard to see in this glare. Let's put that back just a hair. All right, so you're not going to be seeing my face a whole lot while I do this, but all right. I've got some towels handy. I got these over at like, oh God, you can pick these up at Costco for like next to nothing. 10 million of them for $1, whatever it happens to be. Also, for those of us who are blind, the glasses are coming on. So I have this nice thing here. We're gonna put myself up just a hair more. There we go. Oopsie. And this is my Brent CXC. Just lost my sticker. Bummer. Also, what I've done, because one of the things that's really, really big on potters, pottery is really hard on the body, and I've got back issues. So I have this handy dandy brick here that I rest my left foot on because I've got the pedal on my right side that's going to put me up at about the same spot here. Oh, bugger. I have an issue here. There we go. It always helps if you turn it on. All right. So yeah, so I have that that brick there to kind of keep my my butt cheeks even. I have this board here. It was just some scrap wood that's been lying around the house for a while. And you can see from here that I will drop my pieces down on it once they're done. I don't think I'm going to use my other bats, but I'll just do this right now and let's do a warm-up. This could go badly. It'll be interesting. So generally, what you do when you're working with clay and you're working on the potter's wheel, keep in mind that the first few steps are always the same. They never change. You wedge your clay, you put your clay on the wheel head or on the bat. And what I mean by a bat is there's this handy dandy thing that goes on top of the wheel head. There's a couple of pins that you can put in the wheel head, and then you put this on top of the pins. So that's what they call a bat. It's one type of them. There's a lot of them. But you wedge. You throw your thing down, your clay down on the wheel head, and then you center your clay. When you center your clay, what you're doing, because clay is what they call thixotropic. Thixotropic means that when you squeeze clay, it goes up and not out. All right. So that's why pottery works so well, because you can just squeeze the clay and the clay comes up and you can manipulate it that way. So, anyway, what you do is you're pushing and you're pulling when you're centering. Now, some people are like really, really adamant about uh, pulling up and pushing down their clay several times when they're doing that initial centering. I just don't happen to do that unless I think the clay is just really too hard to work with, and I want to get some more water into the clay. All right, so there's that. All right, that's your next step. Ta-da, it's done. Okay, and then the next part is when you open your clay. So you take your fingers, stuff them in there. It's a little bit off center, but that's okay, I'll fix that. And you just pull straight back. All right, and I don't know how well you can see it, but I'm really braced up on top of my my ribs and my thighs, so that I got a really solid base here to work with. The next thing that you do, you take your fingers, you kind of put them all in the line, like Scout's honor kind of thing, and you do what they call compressing the bottom. It's really important to do this step every single time. You don't push really, really hard, because obviously the clay is going to squish down and down and down and down. But it's really important to do that, because that's how you avoid getting cracks in your clay. Clay, when you're working with it, also, the best friend and the worst enemy of clay, of course, is water. So if you keep leaving water in the bottom of your piece, what's going to happen is the centrifugal force from the wheel is going to drive it into that clay, and you're going to wind up with cracks in the clay. It's going to be too wet. When it dries, when it finally dries out, it's going to wind up with cracks and things like that, because it's going to shrink in some areas faster than others. You know, I just put my needle tool out here, and I don't know what happened to it. Literally, there it is. It went hiding. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my needle tool, and I'm going to stick it right down in the middle, boop, and I'm going to slide my finger down till it just touches the top of the floor, so I know about what I've got. This is about as thin as I want that bottom. All right, that's about as thin as that thing is going to go. I am not going to wind up putting a foot on this, because that is a really thin bottom. And we'll talk about cutting a foot on my next thing. But now that I've got that hole in there, I'm just going to seal that bad boy right up. So I've checked my depth. I know I'm not going to be all the way down to the bottom. And now I'm just going to do what they call the claw. So I'm clawing my hand around here. Looks like this. All right. And I'm just going to pull up. I've got my sponge in the other hand, so I can give myself a little bit of water, also known as lubrication. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mop out the bottom here, and then I'm going to start doing what they call pulling up. I'm going to make this nice little notch in the bottom, and then we're going to pull that bad boy up. I'm going to reduce that speed a little. See? And again, this is the first time I'm working with this clay, so we'll have to see. One of the things I think I should mention right now, there are a couple of factors here that are really important to keep in mind when you're working. First off, what you want to do, as best as you're able to do, on the bottom of your piece, is you want to try and remember that you want to work with a curve. Picture an egg, all right? The egg, doesn't break unless you drop it or throw it against something, but it's a self-supporting curve. That whole egg shape is like that. You want to try and duplicate that on the inside of your piece from the floor. How you do that is you will very gently scrape your left hand a little bit along the bottom and then pull up like this, all right? And that'll help to keep you from making your piece so that it doesn't have any support on that inside. All right, let's do it again. What you also do here, it's very interesting because most people think what you want to do is you want to look on the side, this right side that's away from the cameras. You want to look at that and see what you're doing. I was taught that you actually look at this side so that you can see if you're moving your clay up properly. I look on the inside and on the opposite side from where my hands are working. So if you're a lefty, then you'd be working on the other side. All right, so here we go again. I'm going to make that handy dandy little notch in the very, very bottom. And then just ease up. And then at the end of that pull, I'm going to compress the rim. Compressing the rim is just really, really important because that's where, when people wash their cups and they throw them into the dish rack kind of hard or whatever, that's one of the places that it's going to want to chip. So when you compress your rim here, that's when it's really, really important. Also, speaking of what a nerd I am about that mise en place, I forgot the one thing that I really like using. Let's see if I've got it handy. Of course I don't. All right, well, I guess I don't have it, but fascinating. All right, well, I'll just grab this. Normally what I wind up using for these rims is a piece of my clay bag that I've cut out and made into a strip. You can use chamois for this as well. I use like a little piece of plastic because I want to curve this nicely. You can kind of get an idea now. Take a look at that. I want to curve this nicely because I want it to feel nice up against your lips when you're drinking. I don't want it to be rough. I don't want it to be square and sharp. I want it to be nice and feel really good up against the lips. So that's why I do that in that particular way. So let's see. What are we going to do with this? Let's see. What are we going to do with this shape? Okay, I'm going to take my handy dandy tool here. I'm going to cut off a little bit of this. I'm going to throw a little bit of water in there because what that does is it creates a little bit of a hydroplane. I'm going to cut that bad boy right off. And then I'm going to do just a little bit more here. What you do have to keep in mind here with these cups and things of that nature, well, you have to keep it in mind with everything, is that your clay is going to shrink. So if you think you've got this really, really huge piece and it comes out of the very final glaze firing, it's like, wow, that's really small. Well, it's because a lot of these clays will shrink, from anywhere from 12 to 17%. Sometimes it's as low as 7%, but you get the idea. You want to make something that's big so that later on when you want to actually use it, you don't have this little bitty thing. So I'm going to take this handy dandy rib that I showed you a little earlier, and I'm going to create this handy dandy shape. And that, my friends, is why ribs are so awesome. We love them. We love them. Got some water down in there I don't want there. Put a little bit of extra water. Let's make it interesting. I'm going to color this in just a hair. I'm going to take my metal rib and I'm going to see all this. This is all wet. And we don't want that because, again, that's going to ultimately probably create some cracks. And this is going to create a nice smooth surface. Because I think what I'm going to do with this later, I might just stamp this bad boy. See how I'm bracing myself here so I don't cut it, theoretically, in a perfect world? See, and that's what your slip looks like. It's very, very thin, very fine mud. Well, he's kind of cute. I kind of like him. Yeah, he's kind of nifty. Let me get a little bit more of that off. All right, and then I'll kind of clean off my hands here. I'm gonna pop this tray off. Gonna grab this, gonna move that out of my way. And again, we're gonna create that hydroplane. I'm gonna take my wire tool or my garret, and I'm gonna scoop some of that water right underneath that. I'm gonna have this nice and tight so that the bottom of this piece ends up being the same. I'm going to take the edge of my palm like a karate chop, and I'm going to have this handy dandy hand underneath the wheel here, and I'm just going to scoot it real gently, boom, right onto my hand. And there it is. And that's going to wind up getting a handle on it at some point in the not too distant future. All right, so there was that. What I am going to do, instead of using my plastic thing, I'm going to get rid of that bad boy. Clean up the wheel just a hair. And I'm ready to start on my next piece here. Dry it off a little bit so it's not too awfully slick. So when I'm doing that, by the way, I'm kind of fastening the clay to the wheel head. I'm not trying to squish it down flat. I'm just trying to make sure it attaches to the wheel head. And that's why the first time I do this, I sort of lean forward and I squash this down just a hair so that it's really affixed to the wheel head. Because if you're pulling and it falls off, it's just annoying as all get out and you get all angry and cuss, and it's just bad. It's just bad. We don't want to do that. This clay is a little groggier than I'm used to working with. It's sort of interesting. Sort of playing around with it right now to kind of get a sense of what to expect and how it throws and how it behaves and all that. Yeah, it's a bit thicker. I like that a little better. I'll be able to put a nice foot into that. We'll seal that bad boy up. Okay, so you remember this handy dandy tool that I had before? Sometimes I just use it for the foot of the cup or the bowl or whatever, and I don't even use it for anything else. So. Hello, dog. Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? Hello, dog. Hello. Oh my. Are you wagging your tail at me? Are you wagging at me? You're wagging your tail. I can see you wagging your tail. There we go. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, this is a groggier clay than I'm used to working with, and for those of you who don't know what grog is the same clay body, and by clay body we mean the type of clay, that has been previously fired and then kind of pulverized down to a certain mesh and then added back into some fresh clay. So it gives you the ability to do a lot of nice nice things in that. It gives the clay more of an ability to stand up straighter. It's a stoneware clay, so this is going to be a very high fire clay. It allows it to expand and contract and take a lot more heat and cold abuse than something like porcelain, which has no grog in it whatsoever. It's this completely smooth and almost like talcum powdery kind of feeling clay. I think I'm going to do a handy dandy little bowl with this. So it having had more grog, it's a little bit rougher on my hands because it's kind of like sandpaper, you know? Okay, so there's a nice amount that I can put a nice foot on. I'll show you what I mean by foot here in a little bit. I think I've got a piece handy that I can show you. So since I'm going to make a bowl, and I know I'm going to make a bowl from the start, I'm going to throw this a little bit differently, because what I have to do is I have to throw it a little bit thicker and keep in mind that since it's going to be a bowl, everything starts out as a cylinder at first, right? So if it's going to be a bowl, the clay is going to need to be stretched. And if it's going to be stretched, I have to have enough clay, enough thickness in the walls for it to do that without tearing and misery and tears. So again, I'm going to be throwing on my right side because I'm a right-handed person. And I'm going to be looking down and inside right here to see how my clay is moving. Okay, so I'm going to do that sweep that I was telling you about earlier. And I'm going to move this clay. I'm feeling that it's a little bit locked in the sense of it's a little bit, it wants to flop out a little bit more. So I'm just slowing my wheel a little bit. Because again, you know, the centrifugal force of this wheel, and I'm going to color this in a hair or two. The centrifugal force of this wheel is driving that water into the clay, which is going to make ultimately the clay wetter and floppier the longer and wetter that it gets. And I don't want that to happen because then I get annoyed that I've been trying to throw something and it doesn't want to be thrown because there's too much water. Okay, we're going to do another. And especially I want to leave a little bit more clay at the rim because the rim is going to be stretching too, right? This last pass I'm doing, I'm just going to tilt that rim out a little bit. This should be interesting. This may not even work. Woo-hoo-hoo. I am going to cut a little bit of extra off of here. I'm kind of clean off my wheel head so I can see what I'm doing here. Hmm. 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 It's funny, when I teach when I was teaching up at Folsom Parks and Recreation, one of the things that my students used to say, if you can see, there's a little slight wobble here before I start really messing this thing up. And they're, oh gosh, it's wobbling. When you use your bowl or your vase or your cup or whatever, it's not going to be spinning. Nobody's going to notice. Ha! That's magic. It's magic. It's freedom. You gotta love that. So what I'm going to do here at this point, I'm going to wet this outside again a little bit because I do need to use my outside hand to help to support this. And then I am going to start stretching. Now I've got my hand up against the rib, which is on the inside. Okay. I'm looking very carefully in here. And I've got my arm braced up against my side so I don't go flopping all over the place. And I'm just real easy going to stretch this. And I'm going to do it again, just as soft and gentle as you please. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this bad boy sit up a little bit more before I decide to move it, because otherwise it's going to warp while it's on there. So I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to just leave it to dry a little bit before I cut it off the wheel head. This is why ultimately when I get another studio, I want to have at least, if I get a studio that's just for me, I want 2 wheels. So that I can leave something on the wheel head doing this, and then I can be working on the other wheel with something else. So that's something ultimately that I would like to do. I dropped a tool and I can't find it, and I'll find it later. It's not like I don't have enough, right? I am going to do, however. All right, I'm going to leave that there, and then I'm going to talk about something else. We were talking a little earlier about feet. What is a foot? What? Well, I'll tell you. Here's a foot. This is a bowl that I threw a while back. I just got this out of the kiln yesterday, literally yesterday at the ceramic center that I go to. I had stamped this bowl. There's not as much detail. This is a newer glaze to me, so I wasn't sure how it was going to do. So this is almost, for me, this is like a test tile, but it's a bowl. So anyway, you see that I have stamped it. And then before the first firing, what we call the bisque firing, what we'll wind up doing is we will, let's do this here, and we'll tilt this back a little so you can see my face. What we wind up doing is we'll trim our pieces that we've just thrown on the wheel. We wait for them to dry up a bit, not so that they're bone hard or bone dry, as we call them, but there's still a little bit of moisture left to them. Excuse me, it's cold out and my nose is running. We wait for them to be what we call leather hard, which, it does feel like leather. There's still a little bit of flex in it. You can still trim it. You can still stamp it without worrying about it cracking. If it gets too dry, what we call bone dry, you can't trim it anymore. It's just not possible. If you try and stamp it, the whole thing will just go to powder. So what we wind up doing, we have 2 reasons. We have 2 reasons to trim our work. The first reason is to refine the form a little bit more. Because as I think I mentioned to you earlier, sometimes you have to leave a little bit more thickness on the bottom of your piece so that there's enough clay to support it while it dries. So when we do that, we need to trim off that excess, right? And then we need to refine that nice curve that we want. Also, what we do is we want to put in this foot ring here. You can kind of see it on the side a little bit. So that there's a little bit of an indentation inside here. This is something that's really interesting in terms of when you have pottery that has been handmade and one by one, like I do it, because I'm not a production potter. And the other thing is that you, as a production potter, if you don't cut a foot ring into this, and I'll show you a piece like that here in a second, you're going to wind up being faster because you don't have to take the time to flip your piece, trim it, or anything of that nature, and put the foot ring in. And also, since you're paying for your clay, the less clay you use on the bottom and waste on the bottom, okay, the more money you're going to wind up making. So when you go through production pottery, a lot of the time you won't have a foot ring that's cut. if you have people that are throwing it by hand. Now you can actually throw it on a machine. I don't know a whole lot about that. You could probably go through YouTube and find something where you find people who are throwing big production pottery pieces where they basically, it's like they throw it on top of this funky, big industrial, almost wheel type thing, and then they squash it down over a form. It's a completely different way of doing things. And that's not, obviously that's not something that I do. Anyhow, so there's something with a foot ring. And then here's something that's sort of interesting. It's an interesting piece. I'll bring a couple of them here. This is a picture that my grandmother had. I don't know a lot about this. I don't know where it was made. But I can show you that this is the bottom of the foot here. You see there's nothing cut inside. It's a very, very slight, you can see there's a very, very slight sort of indentation. When this piece was leather hard, the artist, whoever it was, basically thumped it on the bottom a couple of times so that this outside edge would allow it to sit straight and solid and not jiggle around when you set it down or be off balance. I've always loved this piece since I was a little kid. Actually, she had this thing forever. God rest her soul. She passed away a few years ago, but it's always been an interesting piece to me. I think this was either salt or soda fired, and that's a completely different way of doing a glaze firing. But I've always liked this kind of leaf pattern. I don't know where she got this thing, but I like the form of it. I mean, if you see that, that belly, this is what we call the belly, and this is where I talk about pushing things out with those ribs and stuff. It's got a kind of a nifty little handle to it here. This thing did actually break in an earthquake at one time, so you can kind of see where she took it and repaired it, or my dad did for her, or something like that. Even so, I mean, I like the blue, the cobalt blue of this is really kind of nifty. Unfortunately, this part got broken as well, so this is not a nice, pure, smooth lip like you would have with something that's brand new and unbroken. But it's got a lot of character to it, and I've always really kind of liked it. I like the sort of, it's kind of rough and pockmarked a little bit on the outside. You can see, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but you can see if you look closely on the inside, you can see the finger marks of the artist who worked on it. And it just makes me happy to know that there's somebody's hands actually throwing this piece. It's just one of my favorites. So this is going to be something I experiment with later, this form, because I just think it's a neat form. But again, this is something that there was no foot ring cut to it. This piece here, I made this a few weeks ago on my Instagram account, which, by the way, my Instagram is Shellhawks Creations. I posted this after I had trimmed it and after I had done the stamps. So you can kind of see that there's like a little, almost like a daisy pattern to this. I did not cut a foot ring on the bottom. I probably could have. I thought it was a little bit thinner than maybe it actually was, so I kind of erred on the side of caution because I didn't want to trim through the bottom of this and then have to throw the whole piece away. But yeah, this came out of the glaze firing yesterday. This is sort of, it's kind of hard to see, but in this light and with these cameras, but it's sort of a very deep, dark, mossy green that I've done here. And this I'm going to put in my Etsy store. It's a little heavier than I would like, honestly. Because, when you do a picture, you should really throw it a little bit lighter, because when you add the water or lemonade or tea or whatever you're going to use, it's going to add to the weight of the picture, and it's going to add to the strain on your wrist when you pour. So pictures really should be thrown a little bit lighter and a little bit thinner. I haven't been throwing, I was forced to basically take a break from throwing and pottery for about a year and a half. When I lost my studio, and then I subsequently had some surgery where I couldn't lift over about 15 pounds. So obviously I'm not going to be slinging, a 25-pound bag of clay around. And so my excuses is I've been kind of out of practice. But now that I'm back at my wheel and everything, and I found a place where I can go do my firings, my style is going to improve and all that. But so that's one of the pieces that I got out of that firing as well. So what I am going to do is I'm going to cut this short now. I'm going to let you guys get on with your Sunday. I hope you've been having some fun watching. I know some of this must be like watching grass grow, but I hope you got to learn a little bit of something about what pottery is about, some of the tools that I use. In the future, I'm going to probably do some more stuff about some other tools that are used. And maybe if I'm really lucky, I will be able to take you to my studio that I go to, not my studio, but the studio that I go to. And maybe we'll be able to see what the kiln looks like when it's being emptied and all of that stuff. So we'll see. If you have any questions or anything like that, I'm always happy to answer whatever I know. Or send you to the place where you can get a good answer. So you can always leave them, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you can leave them down in the comments. For those of you on Twitch, you know how to do all that stuff because you're young and smart and twitchy people, so you can do that. I would like to request, please, I'm trying to rebuild my studio. I'm trying to get some money together so that I can find a space out here that I can rent, which in Los Angeles is ruinously expensive. So if you can go to my patreon.com site, it's again Shell Hawks Creations. I will see if I can leave a link both on the Twitch account and on the YouTube account. You can get my work at etsy.com/shop/Shell Hawks Creations, and that's SHELLHAWKS CREATIONS, Shellhawks Creations. Yes. I also have a blog that I do that's on Halloween and also on my ceramics, and that's Shellhawks Nest. I also usually do for Halloween enthusiasts, I usually do a podcast. I'm part of a podcast called Hauntcast. I haven't done it for the last couple of episodes because life happened. I might be on this next one. I might not. It sort of depends on whether I can get my act together in time. That new show is going to drop at the end of the week. So anyway, thank you very much for watching and coming along on this little journey with me. And I will catch you on the interwebs. You take care now. All right? Okay. End stream.